Okay, let's call the Brattleboro Planning Commission meeting to order of May 2nd, 6:04 p.m. We're going to start off with a presentation mainly for the public about how the Planning Commission and staff is planning on kind of implementing and regulating cannabis businesses. And we're planning on just kind of using the zoning as is with a couple minor tweaks, mainly for clarification. Last year, before the RTM vote to allow retail cannabis, there was a lot of discussion in the town, and the Brattleboro Planning Commission made a press release saying that we would have put forth an extra effort to solicit feedback and be open to the public. Of course, all of our meetings are open to the public and everyone's always invited. But this meeting, the first part that staff's going to present is an extra effort. So I'll turn it over to Sue Fillion, our planning director.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks everybody for coming out tonight and being on Zoom. Just give me a moment. I'm going to share my screen. And I'm a little rusty at multitasking like this. Make sure it's up. Okay, so as Tom mentioned, tonight we're going to be talking about our land use and development regulations, also known as zoning, and cannabis businesses in Brattleboro and how we see them fitting in. We want to take some feedback from the public, hear your reaction to it. The Planning Commission spent a couple of months looking into different issues, discussing, researching, waiting on state regulations that were forthcoming, and to some extent they're here. And so we felt it was time to kind of share with the public what we had been discussing. So I just want to quickly go over a little summary of Act 164, which is the law that created retail cannabis sales and other licenses for adult use. So it legalizes the sale, purchase, taxation of adult use cannabis with regulation, and this is the one that establishes the retail market. It creates an independent commission at the state level to regulate and license adult use cannabis business in Vermont. It allows for retail sale licenses to be issued beginning October 1st, 2022. So anytime after that, retail sales could begin if they get their license. Minimum age of purchase and possession is 21. Public consumption is not allowed, so there won't be bars for smoking cannabis established. They're not allowed anywhere in the state at this time. And towns had to opt in to retail sales of recreational cannabis. And you might recall that Brattleboro did that at 2021 town meeting. There's cultivation, testing, warehousing, and distribution licenses as well. They are not subject to municipal opt-in, so they can happen in any town. And then the statute also provides the ability to establish a local cannabis control board for licensing. That's not something that has been decided for Brattleboro yet, and that will be a select board decision. So we're not going to get into local cannabis control tonight, or a local cannabis control board. And the statute also says that cannabis shall not be regulated as farming, and cultivated cannabis shall not be considered an agricultural product or agricultural crop under state law. And so that I think that really has mostly to do with taxation purposes, but within zoning, certain agriculture is exempt from local zoning. So it does apply to the zoning conversation as well. And this is just the timeline for issuing licenses and when we maybe would start seeing businesses, begin operating in Brattleboro. So April 1st, they started taking applications for integrated licenses. So that could be a medical cannabis shop, that also does testing or has lab services. Small cultivators and testing laboratories were all accepted April 1st. And today they were actually able to start issuing those licenses. And they were also today began accepting, I'm sorry, it was yesterday. Yesterday was May 1st, not today. They also began accepting applications for all types of cultivators. So there's different tiers in the statute. I think there's 3 tiers. And the tier has to do with how big the canopy is. Sorry. Sorry. So June 1st, licenses for all cultivation will begin to be issued. July 1st, product manufacturers, wholesalers, they'll begin accepting those licenses. This is the state cannabis control board. August 1st, they'll begin issuing those permits. So for manufacturers and wholesalers. September 1st, license applications for retailers can be accepted, and those can be issued October 1st. So conceivably, we could see a retail cannabis business October 1st, if everything was in line. Sorry, with more people joining. So when it comes to zoning, some of the things that the Planning Commission needs to balance is, first of all, because Brattleboro opted into retail sales. Sorry. Steve, you have to get out. Sorry, I just got kicked off.
It's not me.
Okay.
Maybe the Zoom bombers are getting more sophisticated. I hope not.
Sorry about this. Can everybody on Zoom hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. A little technical difficulty here. Okay, so when it comes to zoning and what the Planning Commission needs to consider, first of all, Brattleboro opted into retail sales, so we can't use zoning to prohibit it anywhere or to prohibit it throughout town. Indoor and outdoor cultivation, wholesale establishments, processing, manufacturing, and testing and research are allowable, and they have to be treated like any other businesses. So we can't use zoning to prohibit those things. They can be allowed in any town. We have to treat cannabis establishments like any other business, and we can't exceed our authority granted under municipal zoning and statute. One thing to know is that state law does prohibit sales within 500 feet of school property. And so that is for both public and independent primary and secondary schools. And it can also include the property that a school has. So the athletic fields at the high school, if that's on a separate parcel, you can then put the 500-foot buffer if they own it and it's used frequently. And that buffer is actually going to be judged by the state. I'm going to show you a couple of maps in a little bit that do show, where we think the 500-foot is, but the final determination will be at state licensing level. And we don't have the authority to go beyond general zoning powers that are established in the statute. So we can't create buffer. This seems a little unclear, but we can't create special buffers that apply just to cannabis establishments. We could do it to all stores, but just focusing on something for a cannabis establishment does not appear to be something that we can do. And we don't have the municipal authority either through zoning or through a local cannabis control board to limit the number of retail establishments. Some states have actually given municipalities that authority. Vermont did not. So we don't have that authority. So what are some of the tools that we can use in zoning? So first of all, zoning districts, and this is where businesses and different uses can locate geographically in town. Conditional use review up on the top right. So that is, these are land uses that, maybe have a greater impact. So they have an extra layer of review. Here in Brattleboro, that's before the Development Review Board, and we can look at some standards that lie outside of just general site plan review. And so those are decided on by the Development Review Board. If we could list it as a conditional use review, that would be reviewed by the Development Review Board in a public hearing. And there's a little bit more authority to say, yes, it meets the criteria, or no, it doesn't. Where if it's a permitted use in the zoning district, there is still site plan review. So we're looking at different aspects of parking and stormwater management and landscaping. But if it's a permitted use, the use itself really isn't up for debate. Whereas a conditional use, you can talk about how does it fit within the neighborhood. There's some other standards that can be applied. Site standards, I had talked a little bit about that. Parking, landscaping, traffic circulation on site, stormwater management. Those are all things that under in our site standards. Signs, signage is kind of particularly of interest with cannabis businesses. So we regulate the size, the type, the height, the location of it on the building, the lighting of it. And there are some standards in the state statute that have to do with how cannabis is advertised as well. So that's kind of outside the Development Review Board and the Planning Department's authority. But I think there's things such as, you can't have cartoons and, things like that that might be more attractive to you. Parking and loading in a lot of our research, particularly when some of the establishments opened, parking is something that could be a problem. The Planning Commission kind of, we think we have good standards. We don't require too much parking because that's not a good land use. But, we think we have adequate parking to meet the needs. But that's something that is also reviewed in zoning. And then there's performance standards. So these are kind of the nuisance standards. So it could be, I think particularly when it comes to cannabis, it could be odor. If you have a grow facility, just like a restaurant, and exhaust can have an impact on neighboring properties. We think that could be the same for a grow facility or possibly a manufacturer. So we've got some standards to deal with that. And those are tools that we could use if there were problems. And then there are planning considerations that these are some of the things that the Planning Commission talked about as we were kind of looking at our land use regulations. So economic development, there's, redeveloping properties, tourism, where do we want these businesses located, and does it attract business to other stores? And employment, of course, because they're jobs. Some of the public health that we discussed was youth access. We did some research into legal cannabis stores and youth access, recovery services and other sensitive uses where are concerns about locating near teen centers or recovery centers. Some of the public safety, traffic, site security. Site security is dealt with in the state licensing a lot, so we're pretty preempted by that. And then equity issues. We talked about, well, if we push it into the industrial zoning districts, what would that look like? And, having people that can access employment, take transit to get there, making sure that people that either want to access it or work there have the ability to do that. Now we're going to get into a lot of maps, and it might be, I'll walk you through them. It might be a little confusing, but this is our base zoning map for the town of Brattleboro. And really our main thrust in this is that this heavy, let me see if I can get the, this black line that runs north to south on the page about a third of the way over, that's I-91. And so east of I-91 is downtown, Putney Road, Canal Street, most of Canal Street. It's kind of our mixed use, commercial, and somewhat industrial areas if you go to the north and the south of town. And it's also got our denser neighborhoods that are more walkable. And then across the middle is Route 9, which kind of divides the town north and south. There's West Brattleboro Village. There's the area out near Sunset, just east of Sunset Lake Road in this brown area. That's our rural business district. But the two greens that you see there are really low density rural residential zoning districts. So primarily residential in nature. The yellow that you see is our residential neighborhood districts. There is, a different density of housing there. They're the walkable neighborhoods. Some of them are more of the cul-de-sac, like Stockwell Drive and Carriage Hill Lane. But those are also primarily residential in nature, but we do allow a mix of uses, and we'll talk about what does that mean for some of these cannabis businesses. So that's just a kind of a general overview. We really wanted to maintain our development pattern of kind of residential neighborhoods and mix of uses east of I-91, and really kind of do infill development there. I'm going to come back to this. This is a bit confusing, and I have a handout to it. So I think I'm going to skip over it for now. Well, except I'll go back and say there are 5 types of licenses that the state's going to issue. There's cultivator, there's testing labs, manufacturer, retailing, and wholesaler. So what this chart does is we look at our zoning districts, which are these colorful down the left here, the UC, VC, those are all abbreviations. And then across the top are the different uses that we have in our zoning bylaw. So a greenhouse, we view that as, okay, that's like a cultivation. You're growing, right? It's an indoor cultivation. So you'll see in the UC it's marked C, that's a conditional use. So it's a use that would go before the Development Review Board if it wanted to be established in the urban center, which is the downtown area of Brattleboro. If you wanted to do a greenhouse in the service center, which is kind of the Putney Road, Hannaford's area, that's all service center. It goes north of the roundabout. That would be a permitted use. So again, it would go before the Development Review Board, but it would just be straight site plan review. So this is a lot to look at. I'm going to walk through it a bit more in the next slides, but I do have a handout that you can take and look at it. Okay, so cultivation. Cultivation, we assume, can either happen outdoors or it can happen indoors. Probably more likely indoors, but in fact, we've had our first application for an outdoor grow facility, actually. So anyway, let's look at the greenhouse. So in most of the town, it's a conditional use in that yellow area. So that means you can grow in those areas with approval from the Development Review Board. In the green areas, such as this Putney Road area, the rural business zoning district, which again, that runs pretty much from Sunset Lake Road. It takes into the old Ash. I'm trying to think. It's there. It's got the fence. The fencing company, Vermont Hempicurian, has moved out there. That's the rural business zoning district. That's a permitted use there. So They could put a greenhouse in, probably will need site plan review, but it's pretty straightforward in those areas. So the green areas are those. And this little green area down on Canal Street, I'm sorry, I was trying to zoom in for you. That's kind of the Price Chopper area. So while it's zoned that way, there's really not a lot of opportunity down there as it exists. I mean, you could do a scrape off and somebody could want to do a greenhouse. Another way you could cultivate indoors would be through a light industrial zoning type of use. And so that would be our industrial zoning districts. So kind of the old Ferry Road area. It would be, this is Delta Campus, Exit 1 Industrial Park, kind of the properties that are down Route 142. Those are all zoned industrial, and you could do indoor grow in those areas. We also have a couple of areas in the yellow where it could be a conditional use. So that would be in the downtown. If you wanted to, take an existing building or build a new building in downtown and do some growing, you would have to apply and go before the Development Review Board. You have a question?
Yeah, only because you said in the beginning that because of the state statute, we could not use zoning rules to inhibit or control cultivation. But you've just been talking a lot about cultivation and where cultivation could happen based on our zoning rules.
Yep.
But you started by saying that the statute says that we can't control cultivation by zoning rules.
Yeah.
So that's like, I'm confused by those two statements.
Yep. I can see how that I confused you. So what we can't do is basically zone it out. We can fit it within our existing uses.
But the statute says that we can't control cultivation through zoning.
It says we can't prohibit it. We can, just see.
I just wanted to get clarity
Yeah.
on that because it's confusing.
So it says that we must allow it and they can be treated like any other business. So we would say cultivation is like light industrial, and that's how we're going to treat it.
Okay.
And so since light industrial is either a permitted or a conditional use, we're just going to treat it the same as those uses. And then we also thought miscellaneous manufacturing, because you're kind of growing your manufacturing something inside, that was another way that it could be treated. So again, similar to what you just saw in light industrial, but it would be permitted kind of everything north of Veterans Bridge, all the industrial areas of town. And then we have this zoning district called Waterfront. And so you can't see my cursor, I'm sorry, but something like this here, this is actually Spring Tree. It kind of took into the entire retreat meadow, but it's Spring Tree Lane. This is that's Living Memorial Park. That's in our waterfront zoning district. I mean, I'd like to think the town is not going to, be cultivating there. But it's so some of these parcels are showing on the map, but they've got other uses. So testing labs, we have a use called lab. And so these are where it could be allowed. You could have a lab in downtown, in the industrial areas, again, Old Ferry Road area, anything north of Veterans Bridge. You could have testing on a couple of the campuses that we have. So SIT, that's a conditional use, SIT World Learning. It would be a conditional use. Actually, it's allowed in Delta Campus, Exit 1 Industrial Park, the Winston Prouty campus. So those are areas where labs are currently either permitted or conditional. There's a manufacturing license. And so that license is That's where you can produce cannabis products from the plants, including edibles, oils, and other such products. So these are kind of the areas, again, pretty, a lot of it's east of 91. You've got our rural business district, West Brattleboro Village, downtown, kind of all the same areas that we just talked about would be allowed. Again, light industrial could also be considered manufacturing, so very similar zoning districts. Wholesaling licenses, these are the wholesaling is basically they're buying it from a producer and then, kind of packaging and sending it out. They're not selling here. And so, I jumped ahead, sorry. This is, I didn't realize that was hanging out there. So these, again, kind of the Putney Road, this green area is kind of north of Royal Plaza. So we have this little neighborhood zoning district, that neighborhood center zoning district that is from Veterans Bridge to Royal Plaza, where we want to have more housing and kind of smaller scale retail. So wholesalers could not be located there, but anywhere north they could. Again, down the Route 142 area, kind of Cotton Mill Hill, those are industrial zoning districts. Delta Campus, Winston Prouty, the rural business, kind of out by Sunset Lake Road. It would be conditional in West Brattleboro Village and the downtown to have a wholesaler. And part of the reason to think about conditional there is that there might be more traffic, more truck traffic, box trucks or whatever it might be. And so there's challenges in the village center and the downtown. Okay, retail shops. So these are obviously where they can sell cannabis and cannabis products to the general adult public. And this is the only license where we could create special rules if we wanted to within the scope of the statute. And so under none of the other licenses can they actually sell to the public. So here, I think there's a couple things, our green areas are where it's permitted. These are our typical commercial areas. You've got the exit 1 area around Canal Street. You've got the Putney Road area, kind of all the way north of the Veterans Bridge. You have downtown, West Brattleboro Village, and the rural business zoning district. In the industrial zoning district, we do allow small shops if they're like factory stores. So I don't know how that would work with cannabis. They're going to have a retail license if they were doing it. If it was manufacturing and they wanted to have a retail, they'll have an integrated license, and then perhaps they could do retail sales there. Yeah. The yellow areas are, some of them are in our residential neighborhood zoning district, and some are in the rural residential zoning district. And there's some caveats on those. So we've got 2 areas. I'm going to show them here and explain this map. So what we did here is, this is the area between exit 1 and exit 2. We have shown all the schools with a 500-foot buffer. Again, it will be the state making the formal designation. You'll see that along Western Avenue and South Main Street, there are a bunch of parcels highlighted blue and filled in blue. Those are areas where, under our current zoning, we allow small shops of up to 2,000 square feet. So they're in residential neighborhood areas, primarily residential zoning, all different single family, multifamily. And the reason, under the existing zoning, the reason we did that is we wanted to preserve the ability to have a neighborhood store where you could buy your milk, or maybe it was, I know on South Main, there used to be a couple of those and maybe some bars in the neighborhood. Western Ave had Cooper's Coop and other iterations of small stores there. So this is one area that, it could open up some of our more residential neighborhood areas to a store. It would be small. It would have to be less than 2,000 square feet to meet our zoning. And I don't know whether or not that would, once you meet all the state licensing requirements and security requirements, I don't know if it would make sense to open it up. But under our existing regulatory scheme, those blue parcels that are outlined in blue and shaded in blue, they're a real, they're a possibility for a retail store, small. And you'll see, there are some areas where the school buffer, we think will take it out, like here, these parcels on this side of South Main Street, probably, we think they wouldn't be able to have it. Similarly, there's some buffer around Green Street School or the neighborhood schoolhouse that could take some of the parcels out. But so this is one area. And to point out, this is when we apply the buffers to downtown and the surrounding neighborhoods, you'll see that in the northern part of downtown up here, so this is the urban center zoning district, this kind of, what color is that? Rust color. And then you've got this blob around St. Michael's School. Everything in red there is a parcel that we think you wouldn't be able to have a retail cannabis because of the buffer. But the rest of downtown, which includes Flat Street and Elliott Street and some down 42, and even kind of in this municipal center area on this side of the street, could potentially have a cannabis retail shop. And there's no size limit to that. Whereas on the Western Ave and South Main, it was 2,000, there would be no size limit. This is again kind of showing the exit 2 area. So the neighborhood schoolhouse. Again, the blue parcels along Western Ave would have the potential for a small 2,000 square foot max store. And then this is in the canal in the South Main Street area. So again, you'll see the blue parcels along South Main Street. This is Canal Street over here. And when you put the buffers on between the school and the career center and the middle school, it looks like there's 2 impacted properties on Canal Street. It would be Vermont Marketplace and Red Clover Commons, that maybe they would not be able to get a state license to have a retail store in either of those locations. And again, the blue small store. And then in West Brattleboro Village, kind of similar to downtown, we've got Academy School here, kind of surrounded by that black circle blob. The blue underlying is that zoning district, the Village Center zoning district. So almost half of West Brattleboro Village on the east end of it would not be able to have a retail store. But pretty much everything north of the triangle, kind of Greenleaf, north, South Street, up those ways could potentially have a retail shop. And again, no size limit on that. So those are the maps. Just really quickly, a couple of resources, and then I want to open it up for questions and comments. The Vermont Cannabis Control Board has some good guidance on their website, so you could take a look at that. And also our land use and development regulations are online. That's kind of you can also email us and we will send you a link to them or help walk you through them. There's 3 of us in the planning department that can help with questions. Myself, this is Steve Hayes, he's our planning tech, and Brian Bannon is our zoning administrator. So we can answer questions about process or about location. Anybody has any concerns, we're happy to answer those. And so I think with that, I will, do you want to take comments and questions?
I think like you said, questions and comments and feedback, but I'll just say, very good visual presentation, and I hope anyone who wants to have a copy of that can easily get it, because I don't think anyone has all those things memorized, and so people might have some questions and feedback that they'll get to us later after studying that a bit more, and our land use regs. But yeah, let's open it up. Well, how about we alternate, I guess, between in person and on Zoom, for as long as that goes.
That
Maya.
sounds good. I think because it's being recorded, if you could come up and speak, that would be great. And if you are on Zoom and you would like to comment or ask questions, if you raise your hand.
Sue, if you have a better view of the Zoom people, you can just call out, because this is your staff's presentation mainly.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Maya Hasagawa. I'm the chair of the Development Review Board, so I find all this very interesting. And I had a question about places that cater to children that are not schools, like Winton Prouty and the Boys and Girls Club, for two examples. And there may be others in town that I'm not familiar with, some daycare centers. Why has the state not done the 500-foot buffer? And can we do that?
I can't speak to why the state didn't do it. What I think they did do is consistent with kind of federal law, where you can't sell a controlled substance within 500 feet of a school. That's my understanding of what they did. They could have allowed probably a larger buffer, but that's what they went with. It's not actually clear to me that we can buffer other uses. I think that it's something we need to look into a little bit more. I've heard really varying interpretations as to whether or not we can. It's one of those kind of unsettled things. Under state statute in zoning, the areas, the statute that it references is 4414, and that allows buffers on river corridors and shorelands. So you get into this area of you're putting buffers for cannabis uses, treating it different than other uses. We certainly have buffers on adult and adult uses, but that's kind of, we've got authority under the Supreme Court to do that.
Yeah, I know that store that went out of business, that vape store, was moved, didn't come downtown because of the proximity to the Boys and Girls Club.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to see that a store across the street, like at the Latches were to rent one of their storefronts to a retail store right across the street from the Boys and Girls Club.
Sue, just to clarify, it was more than schools, right? There was a kind of caveat that said, or other places that are dominated by children.
No,
you had something on one of those first slides.
It's schools, it's public schools and independent schools, primary and secondary.
Oh, schools, period. Okay.
Yeah,
I thought
it
I
is
read it
not
differently.
childcare centers. I did look into
Okay.
that. Yeah, I spoke with somebody at the state about that. It's not childcare, and it's not, facilities where youth might congregate. Yeah. We'll look into that some more.
Be good to know our options.
Yeah. I see Cassandra Holloway.
Sure, go ahead.
Hi, I'm sick, so I apologize for my voice or how well I present today. So I'm Cassandra Holloway, and I am the director of Building a Positive Community. I've seen many of you before, if not all of you. I'm talking to you about just kind of what we're looking at as well around retail cannabis coming into the community. There is a training for municipalities, especially planning committees. And I don't know if you're all aware of it, on the 24th of May through the Vermont Leagues for Cities and Towns and the CCB, to kind of answer some of the questions that towns may have. I find it we've been told, again, there's a lot of kind of lack of clarity in some areas, such as the ability for towns to put additional like buffers for places like just mentioned, where youth or people in recovery, more vulnerable populations may congregate. So I think that would be really important for at least one of you to attend that meeting and ask that question. And it also kind of blows my mind that there's no density. So basically what I heard you say, Sue, is that a town can't basically put any cap on how many retail or any of the businesses could be in our town. And that seems like something it just seems bizarre. So I hope that gets clarified too. So I don't know if you know about that, if you all know about that training on the 24th for municipalities. But I was curious if you are planning on to attend, and if you'd be willing to clarify those two questions if you were there. Thank you.
Thanks, Cassandra. I had heard about that about right before I went on vacation last week. So yes, I will plan on attending and clarifying that as well. Yeah, the buffer thing just kind of, I've asked a couple of times, and I think sometimes the state CCB, they don't want to be the zoning experts. So we haven't gotten really clear guidance on that. And so we'll speak to the town attorney about that, and we'll speak, I'll bring it up there and kind of see what everybody's thinking. I do know a couple of towns were thinking of extending the 500-foot buffer to a 1,000-foot buffer. But that doesn't even look like it's possible. But we'll get some clarification on that and the density.
Okay.
Anyone here in person have anything to say right now?
I did want to go back to one thing, because I think we had shown, let me see if I can bring the slide up. I didn't talk to it, and I just wanted to make sure I clarified. So in our rural residential zoning district, it showed retail as a conditional use. And Steve, do you remember what there is a size that's 2,000. That also kind of like those strips along Western Ave and South Main Street, that would be a conditional use, and it would be limited to 2,000 square feet. So again, something small. And I think that's, with a conditional use and going before the Development Review Board and really getting to look at the character of the area. First of all, I don't know how economically feasible it would be to have a retail store. Possibly if it was integrated with, a grow facility or something, maybe that's where you would maybe see a retail store in a more rural part of, or in a more rural residential area.
Yep, Daniel. Oh, and should we pass out any of these things now? Want me to do it?
That'd be good.
Thank you, Carl.
Hi, Sue.
Hi, Daniel.
Thanks for the presentation. Daniel Quip. I live in Brattleboro. I don't usually attend meetings of the Planning Commission, and I greatly appreciate all of the people that do and people that volunteer on that committee and staff that department. I think, in large point, the zoning and land use regulations that exist, will help guide us to a sensible policy around, cannabis establishments in Brattleboro. As I was kind of listening to your presentation, I wondered what are the regulations around establishments that sell or serve alcohol and tobacco, and because thinking about some of the places that are within some of those buffer zones, I'm like, well, I know you can go in there and buy a bunch of cigarettes and alcohol, but you would not be permitted to sell cannabis in that zone. So I guess I'm kind of curious about the discrepancy there, not necessarily with the judgment one way or the other, just why there's a discrepancy.
Yeah, so Well, what I would say, when the planning commission started looking at it, we did look at what are kind of the regulations around where can you sell tobacco and where you can sell alcohol. And basically our regulations, a shop is a shop is a shop. It doesn't really matter what you're selling unless it's an adult, what do we call it in the regulations?
Adult entertainment?
Not adult,
No.
well, it's adult entertainment and you even know the section. Yeah, unless it's an adult entertainment store, then again, that's got US Supreme Court where we can put buffers on it, put it in certain zoning districts and whatever, and have it as a separate use. But no, so the retail areas that you saw, minus the 500-foot buffer, it would apply to the sale of alcohol or to the sale of tobacco. We don't currently have any special sign restrictions or anything. So all uses, are afforded this a similar size sign. So what you saw under the retail shop, that you could also find alcohol and tobacco there. There really isn't a discrepancy there. Does that answer your question? Okay. And that is something that the planning commission had looked at. So thanks for asking that. Cassandra, did you have another question or?
No, sorry. I just unraised my hand. Thanks.
Okay. Any other?
Hi, Ricky Davidson. I just want to follow up on the question that Daniel asked, which you asked very eloquently, and thank you. But so I'm just trying to clarify for myself. If somebody, a current retail establishment that maybe sells alcohol and tobacco, if they got a license to sell cannabis and it wasn't within the 500-foot buffer zone, that could happen. So for instance, Hannaford's, who sells alcohol and tobacco products, could sell cannabis. And currently there's no regulation on the number of retail establishments within the community. So anybody that sells anything could also sell cannabis as long as they're not in the 500-foot zone.
Yes. However, you would then want to take a look at the licensing requirements from the state because it's pretty, it seems pretty tight. I guess I wouldn't assume that everybody's just going to want to.
No, I'm not assuming that either, but I'm just saying, like, say for instance, I wanted to open a store downtown that sold whatever books. I opened a bookstore downtown, and I also wanted to sell cannabis products. I was willing to meet the state regulations on that. There's no restriction to that.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Just wanted to make sure.
And then in terms of the number of stores, yes, 50 stores could apply to, if 50 stores got their license in Brattleboro and they had suitable spaces to do it, yes, they could open.
And Sue, to follow up with that for a little clarification, maybe if a new store comes in and gets, let's say they're under conditional use in a certain zone and they go before the DRB, but it's for a bookstore, maybe let's just say that would easily pass, right, and get approved. But then they wouldn't have to come before the DRB if they decide to start selling something else inside, or correct, because they've already been approved as a store.
Yes.
They didn't have to say they were a bookstore, but it probably came up in the case of the DRB meeting, but. Yeah.
So a good example of that is in the downtown on Main Street, Elliott Street, Flat Street. If it's a first floor, and it's been a store and it's going to change to another store, that is an administrative permit. Any permit that is issued has a 15-day appeal period. So they put the big red Z in their window and it can be appealed. But if it's a permitted use, there really is no reason to overturn it. So it's pretty straightforward permitting if you're going from one shop to another shop or, one retail use to another.
Mhm.
Yeah. Daniel.
Daniel, quick. So the local cannabis control board, which may well end up being the select board, just like how we are local liquor commissioners. What powers, I know this is a bit of a gray area, but what powers does it seem like they're likely to have?
So my understanding of local cannabis control boards is that they don't really have anything above and beyond what the state has. They can check the zoning, they can deal with signs, and I think public nuisances. So maybe, under the kind of ordinances of the town. And I don't know, in my mind, I'm not really sure how the ordinances come into play, at least with initial licensing. But if they're up for a renewal and maybe there's been some issues, then maybe there's more, a little bit more area to bring those ordinances in. That's my understanding of local cannabis control boards. Cassandra?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I thought that, so it was a question and a comment to Daniel's, that he just spoke to, but my question that I initially was going to ask is, doesn't the business have to be for 21 and over? It's, I believe that's what it's for the retail.
Yeah.
That you, so it couldn't just be, I mean, if it's a bookstore, then it's a bookstore for 21 and over, not just a bookstore for the public. So I think that's important to clarify. Correct?
It is 21 and over, but I would imagine that you could have a area, maybe with a controlled entrance. I kind of think like back to the old movie stores where you would have to be a certain age to enter, and they're going to have to check IDs and that kind of thing.
Yes, and
So
I
think there is a potential for
Okay.
certain stores.
Yeah, and I'm wondering too with the signage, because I remember about a month or two ago, they were talking about not being able to really, other than to say what the business is, they'll not be able to advertise the products at the storefront. So I think that would be just something else to check. And Daniel, I'll send out something to all the select board around the cannabis control commissions of kind of the best practices that came from the CCB, as well as some, kind of experts inside the state as well as outside of the state around kind of reducing the risks of, any kind of impact to communities. So there's best practices there that I'll share with the select board. I'll probably come to a select board meeting soon anyway, but I'll send that to you so I can give you a little more information. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? From Zoom or?
One of my favorite perennial questions is, will this be on the town website? So there's
Yes.
lovely maps.
It will be. I think I need to clean it up a little bit and explain what they're looking at. But yes, it will be. It will be.
Where do you think, Sue? The planning department page or the main town website in that updated list? Or
I think maybe a link from the news feed on the, I'll work with the town manager's office.
Okay.
I think that would be good. I see Sam has their hand raised. Hi, Sam. Let's see. Oh, we can't hear you. I think you need to unmute.
How about now?
Yep, great.
All right, perfect. Hey, Sue. Hey, Brian. Hey, others. My name is Sam Neal. I'm the managing director of Tau Labs, LLC, marijuana-based business, headquartered actually in Brattleboro, Vermont. A quick word of thanks, obviously, for the clarification around the zoning, and just a quick comment on one of the earlier slides. All licensing up to tier 5 has actually already opened up. I know you mentioned June 1st, but it's actually open now for total qualification. So just wanted to give a a quick comment there and a word of thanks again.
Thanks, Sam.
All right, cheers.
I think that's it. I don't see
Okay.
any other hands. Thanks everybody for attending. This will be on the town website. Please reach out to the planning department. We're happy to help answer any questions or take any comments and share them with the planning commission as well.
And do we estimate that we'll make some of those little minor like definitional tweaks and stuff to the zoning at the same time that we do some larger housing, unrelated to cannabis, but housing zoning, and that may be early next year?
It might be.
Okay, but
I
this-
mean, it could be, sooner if there were some major changes that we saw.
Sure. Yeah, or with the public's feedback or things that we think of, we may make more than just those minor definitional changes, but okay.
I guess I just got one question. I guess now that being the new, would that go on the town's website where the land regs and all the other regulations are at as well?
I think I'm going to put the presentation with a link from the homepage. I think that's what I'll try to do.
Okay.
And I did just want to point out that Tom and Gary are here. We have several planning commissioners that are on Zoom as well. We have Prudence McKinney, Sarah Lang, and Dan Handy. So just wanted to, we truly are hybrid as a planning commission today.
Yeah, this is our first return to hybrid. So it's 7:00. Maybe we should take 5 minutes and then we'll start the rest of the planning commission meeting, which has, nothing to do with cannabis. But any public on Zoom or in person is welcome to stay. But how about at 7:05 we reconvene?
That sounds good.
Okay,
All right.
let's reconvene.
Yes, as commissioners. Do I say that? Can we reconvene like they do with the select board? Now, where are we
Yeah.
convening to? We're now convening from
The only
public.
time we ever do that is when we have a public hearing for
Which was
amendments.
this
Are we
No,
taping
that
again?
was just a presentation.
Okay,
Oh,
we're
okay.
on.
Okay, great. We have Brian Bannon and Jane Wheeler. And the rest are commissioners and staff. So if anyone of the public wants to chime in after each agenda item or in the midst of it, just put your hand up if you can, or yell if you can't. So we're going to start with announcements. I have 3. Can I say that we chose the consultant
Yeah.
for,
they were
yeah,
online.
so
Go for it.
for the bylaw modernization grant, a few of us met the selection committee with staff, and we chose the applicant PlaySense with some for the bylaw modernization grant for our housing amendments project and housing regs amendment project. And we had a few points to revise their proposal to modify it. So that got to them, and
Yep.
we'll see what they have to say about our suggestions and our acceptance of them. The other thing is that I noticed today, if you all will recall the preferred sites, preferred siting, thing that happened a year and a half ago, and then we formed that subcommittee and worked on that for most of the year,
Right.
for mostly for solar. Well, the PUC is doing an amendment, or they have proposed changes to that rule, which has more than preferred siting in it. It's just overall called the net metering rule, 5.100. And they have proposed changes to it, and they're inviting comments by May 27th. So for example, one of the changes is that it says, how that list says a preferred site includes, and then it has a list of 9 things, one of them being, up to the town and regional commission to choose. Well, at the first thing, it says that as long as it does not include significant forest clearing, which is defined as an acre or more. So that's their current proposal. So that's quite different, and what certain people and were advocating for. So we'll see after with comments if that stays or not. But there's other changes, and that's not to say that they couldn't add other changes that they haven't proposed. So now's the time until the end of May to weigh in on that. And I shared that with the other 3, the energy and conservation and ag committees, because they were part of the preferred siting subcommittee. So maybe they'll want to view that at their meetings and weigh in. But I just found out about that yesterday, and it wasn't enough time to put that on the agenda, which I would debate if we even should, but anyone can submit comments. And then the third thing is that one of our commissioners resigned, Doran Ham. So sad to see Doran go, but, understandable for the reasons, he provided. So that's all I have for announcements.
Great, thanks. I have one additional one, and that is, I think at our April meeting, I'm not sure we had picked the consultant for the bike walk or the walk bike master plan, and because we were doing interviews and that got a little held up. Anyway, great candidates, and we have chosen SLR. They're kind of an international planning firm. They've got offices in Waterbury, and we'll also be working with some of their Connecticut staff. So both the contracts for PlaySense and SLR will go before the select board tomorrow night on their consent agenda. Hopefully it stays there, and we'll get authorization to proceed with contracting. And both of them will get up and running. The walk bike master plan, they feel they can do the project in 6 months. So that should be completed in the fall. So that's what our contract will reflect. So that's a pretty good alignment, I think, for both grants and even town budgeting. So that's pretty exciting.
Great. Yeah. It's a busy year, 2 projects.
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else? Or agenda amendments, if anyone needs to flip things around. If not, we'll move to the minutes.
The agenda amendments, like, we didn't get one.
Sorry, the minutes, approving the minutes
You didn't get minutes?
of last April.
Oh, yes. Okay. Good. When you said agenda, I was like, I don't think we got one this year, this month.
Yeah, I misspoke. Sorry. Approving the minutes of last April.
Well, I moved that we approved the minutes of April 12th, 2022.
All right, Gary makes the motion. I will second it. Any comments, suggestions? I have one little one under the cannabis category item. There's a typo, I believe. Second paragraph, there's 3 paragraphs. Third line, it says, it just does get the land use exemptions.
It just doesn't get.
Doesn't, yeah, it does not. Okay. Right, good, okay. That's it. And that's all I have.
So if I'm not mistaken, that's tomorrow's meeting with the select board, right, Sue?
Yes.
So I don't know where we're at on that agenda, but I will be here in person for support.
It is on the consent agenda, so it's possible it's just going to get approved. So it'll be on in the beginning. If it gets pulled, it stays till it goes to the end.
Okay.
If anyone has any interest in parklets, we will be presenting a potential program for a permanent parklet, a permanent program for temporary parklets in downtown.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm glad you guys are bringing up the select board meeting again, because it's actually, dominated by a lot of things that we are talking about, right? I mean, the Winston Prouty housing initiative, they're going to be on there proposing, presenting that to some degree. And then also that Harris lot proposal that town staff is working on and has sent out is going to be on there as well. So a lot of housing and planning commission related things. But back to the minutes. Hearing no other suggestions or edits. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. And Sarah's hand is up. That's unanimous.
Great, thank you.
Great. Okay, moving on to our 720 item, which is, so Maya and I, Maya Hasagawa, the chair of the DRB, we shared a couple emails after last planning commission meeting about that DRB review criteria regarding, energy conservation or energy generation. And, she came up with the idea that it's been maybe 3 years since we had a joint meeting. I think we did that in the library community room, if that's the one I'm thinking of. Anyway, and so she thought it'd be a good idea to have another one, and I agreed. So this item, just for 10 minutes or so, is just to see what people think of that idea and how you might want to approach it. Just this is the way I see things. I think it's true, not with the meeting, but I mean, the planning commission is kind of like a legislative branch, right? In a sense. I mean, we're advisory to the select board, but our purview is to write the rules, the land use regs, and the DRB and the zoning administrator interpret that in the sense that they enforce it and rule on applications and, and permits. So to have these two bodies, the writers and the readers, so to speak, actually get together and, they may say, how they see things being confusing in the regs or not working, or they may just have different perspectives. And then we may say, like, how can we make you more effective? Or do you have some abilities that you want that you don't have, or anything? So that's my introduction to that. But what do people think of that idea? And I think it could be for DRB's next meeting in May, or should we aim for June?
I think Maya was saying that their May meeting wasn't going to be great because she had asked them to start brainstorming a list.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a meeting in 2 weeks' time. We have a calendar up. Was it May 13th? Anyway, I think she thought that was going to be too soon.
Okay.
But if everybody thinks it's useful, we can find a time. I have to say, I think some of our planning commission meetings coming up between the two projects.
Yeah.
I don't know that we have time to meet with them at one of our meetings because we'll really get going. Hopefully on at least the bylaw modernization, we'll have things to talk about in June on that.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe trying to find time on a DRB meeting, or they have an off meeting schedule. I think it's the first Wednesday of months where they sometimes will meet.
And so if we were to have it, I mean, I'm starting to speak as if the other commissioners are in favor of this, but just, I guess it helps as introduction. I think that makes sense to me to have it at a DRB meeting, because for that reason, our planning commission meetings look kind of busy or swamped, for the rest of the year with current projects. But also we haven't had a second meeting in a month in quite a while. I don't think since I've been chair, but I remember before I was, every so often we'd have a second meeting a month for whatever reason. So I don't feel like that's too onerous. But my question is, the DRB meetings aren't really organized by time, because it just depends on how the application goes. So are we going to be first on the agenda? No, we're going to be towards the end, and we just don't know what time that will be.
Yeah. And I know that for their June meeting, they already have a couple of applications.
Yeah.
So, and I think there's kind of been a warning issue with their May 18th meeting, which I was suggesting to Maya when she was here earlier that May 18th might make sense, but she was saying she thought that was too soon.
Okay.
So that means they probably have DRB meetings, possibly June 1st and June 15th. I don't know. I mean, it actually might have to be the beginning of July. I don't know how that'll work, but we can work on trying to find a time.
Okay. I guess we'll just leave that
And if
scheduling
gets
there,
too
but
far,
we'll do a poll or email
we
or
can do
something.
polls.
Okay.
More like a TBD.
TBD regarding the scheduling. Yeah. But what do people think? Do they think, what do people think of this?
Well, my thought, I mean, basically what Myron was to, what they're saying, to have this collaboration would take time. I mean, how much time? And that's the thing too, when we have our DRB meetings, sometimes I guess Dan could confirm that sometimes the information is not all there. And now we're trying to figure out a way to where if the information is not there, we have to sidestep, we're running into issues, information coming away from people who are trying to get things
Yeah, I think
approved.
that's a separate issue.
So,
Mhm.
or sometimes they might not show. That's a hit and miss. A person, they might not be ready. So I don't, how long will you think a presentation like that would, or informal educational meeting like that?
Well, my thought is that when we have a time scheduled, that then people, commissioners and DRBers, borders, will, do some homework before the meeting and come up with
Right.
their thoughts and questions, because
Right, yeah.
maybe, the people of the not opposing, but opposite committee or board might want to have some preparation to answer the questions instead of just being asked them on the fly during the meeting, so they can do a little homework. And then each group will get that for the background materials. And then based off that, we'll see how much time it might take. If people have very little, task the other or to propose to the other, then maybe it'll just be half hour. Maybe if there's a lot, if everyone has something to contribute or ask, then maybe it will be a whole hour and a half. I don't know.
Well, if everyone has the packet that they gave out for the new land regs that we have now, because I know I got a updated version.
From last year,
And
yeah.
you're looking at, let me see, when's the fiscal? July, right? That's another thing too. If everyone looks it over, studies, write down whatever questions. I don't know, because I'm just trying to get an idea of how long the meeting itself would go, an hour, maybe or less.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last time we held a joint meeting, there were just a couple of issues about signs and, a couple of other suggestions where there were little issues that the DRB felt would be helpful to be addressed. I guess it just depends on what they see. I see Dan's hands up.
Yeah, Dan.
You can't unmute yourself, Dan.
For some reason, I was having trouble. I don't know why.
I have to take that off.
Let's see my index finger.
Difficult for you guys.
that one didn't work either. All right, there we go. Yeah, so this is one of those situations where it's logistically and possibly practically awkward for individuals to be on both the DRB and the Planning Commission. Not that it's a problem, but I want to just talk about it because I started as an alternate on the DRB myself. And now I'm a voting member, and Gary and I are in the same sort of situation. So I don't know if there's any reason to do anything about that, but I just want to raise it as an issue. I'm sure it's not uncommon, but it's one of those things that for this particular meeting, we might want to figure out a way. It is convenient. I just want to put this out there. It's convenient that we have two people who are actually on both.
Right.
So we could, I'm not proposing this, but there could be some creative way to.
Yeah, I think, Dan, I understand your concern, but what I would say is it's often been recommended that there be somebody that's on both boards, because under the old model of development review, it was being done by planning commissioners, right? And they'd write the rules and they knew the intent behind them.
Right.
So having some cross-pollination between the boards, I think has been, the idea of, well, planning commissioners are just sitting over here and they're writing them, but they don't have to implement them and they're losing touch with it. And so if you've got a couple people that are on both boards that can kind of share that experience. So I don't think there's any conflict. And, you are a writer of them and you also get to implement them. There, it's actually.
No, I don't think there's any, I don't know if I said the word conflict. I apologize if I did, but no, I think awkward is kind of the best word I can come up with, simply because you would have an extra person on one or the other. Like that's one, like whole spot, another brain, on one or the other board. But if there's any, let's say if there's any particular, I don't know, even a particular question that someone would have for both boards, that we might that Gary and I might have a sort of a unique perspective on, that might be something that you guys could even think of. Questions
Yeah.
about that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean,
Not that it's that important, by the way. I just want to raise it,
yeah, no, I understand. I mean, I think the way that it's gone in the past, and I would imagine that it's the way that Maya envisions it is, we really have a problem with signs. People come up with these great signs, but we don't have any way to approve it. It's just giving the planning commission areas to look at, or this standard doesn't work. It's too hard to apply, or we get a lot of people ask, not submitting, a stormwater management plan. I'm just kind of spitballing, but it's kind of like the bigger concept that they'll bring up. I mean, it could be nitty gritty stuff as well, but so yeah.
Yeah, and we could look at, we've never in my time on the planning commission felt the need, I guess, to look at part 4 of the land use regs, the administrative procedures. But we could potentially, look at that and propose some changes to the DRB. Not that, if we have any, thoughts, whether that's academic or intellectual, or whether we've actually seen DRB meetings and felt like there's deficiencies or things that could be improved. So part 4 talks about, the actual administrative procedures, not just the strict land use, regs, but actually how and under what conditions they're implemented by both the zoning administrator and the DRB.
But I like to think too, you're getting the best of both worlds, Dan, if you know what I mean. So you're getting educated from both ends, because what we're getting from here, because the way it's written up, we can incorporate and spill over to the DRB and interpret. I mean, if anyone on there comes new, if they don't understand, Dan and I can give them an understanding on how that was put together, because a lot of times people don't know, how did you come up with that? So just like when Daniel Quip was talking about with the regulations with cannabis. I mean, I couldn't answer that because I didn't have infinity we could sue. So that way, knowing and having that information available would be pretty much, a good idea in a sense, because then it can be properly explained to a person that's coming to present and wanting to know about land use reg. Well, that's right, from the planning commission, this is what was taught, this is what we learned. So it can be an advantageous, it could be a pro in a lot of ways. And it's an educational tool also for both ends. I don't know how it's been done in the past, how you guys came together and collaborated.
Like Sue said last time, it's coming back to me now. It was basically the DRB had and Brian, the zoning administrator, I think together had 4 ideas, for revising the land use regs, but it was largely them contributing to us. But it could go both ways.
And I think too, that's not a bad idea too. We can probably sue, I guess. I mean, it could become a regular if we come up with something new that spills over or that's deemed education, but we can come together with the DRB also playing rather than once a year, once every month?
I think it was 3 years ago. But yeah, I mean, we'll see how this one goes and the productivity of it. Let's hear from Prudence.
You might be able to.
I just wanted to say that excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm a little bit sick. I think it sounds like a good idea, and I'll just, wait to get information on the scheduling of it. Thanks.
Sounds good. Yeah.
I just have one other. The design review committee, I think we should invite them as well. They use the regulations to make interpretations in the historic resource overlay districts, and they've got lots of thoughts.
Okay. How about, even though we don't need to, I move that we agree to collaborate and have a joint meeting with the development review board and the design review committee at some to be determined date.
I second.
Any more discussion? All in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that's all 5 of us. Great. Moving on to the last agenda item. this is a great idea that I heard about from Steve and thought it would be great for him to work on and present and have us give some guidance and direction on for this meeting. It relates to housing and just mainly focusing on the kind of low hanging fruit or the considering the costs of the land use regs that add costs to housing. And so we can kind of see it all right before us and consider in sort of a very kind of open, comprehensive, and maybe analytical way what, at least at first, what we could in this, some call it a housing crisis, which regs we could potentially reconsider and pare away beyond, the ones that that this bylaw modernization grant is probably going to be focusing on, which is more like, densities and setbacks and zoning and uses, I believe. So that's really all I know about it, but it seemed very enticing. So I'll let Steve take it away.
Okay. I'll say first to not be afraid of the size of this document. What we're seeing here is mostly some notes on basically this is broken down by all of the sections of our land use ordinance and any potential opportunity that these regulations take that may add cost to overall housing development. So I think it's important to keep in mind when we're looking at all of these that it's not inherently negative. If something adds a potential cost, we may well find that our planning values are worth the trade-off to potentially add cost. So for example, if one of them that might potentially add costs to the development of housing is, the fact that we have floodplain regulations. Another one being that we regulate against excessive erosion from development. We would likely find those things to be worth doing. And frankly, there are always state and federal requirements and grant funding opportunities that require compliance that we should keep in mind. So that may well be another element to keep in mind as we consider potentially changing some of these. But I think that there are a few particularly sections within our current land use regulations that may well add substantial cost or potentially make the construction of new housing units particularly difficult. So I'm hoping that we can just go through some of the general themes and start to think about and maybe have a conversation about how our planning values fit in with the potential added costs and see if there's general consensus on some of these things to focus on potentially striking as we do our bylaw modernization work. So I'm gonna see if I can make this full screen for y'all.
It is.
Yeah, that was not.
Also closer, Gary.
It was, they don't see your.
I think it's big.
Oh, well, no, I was hoping to get the top toolbar, but that's all right.
50-50.
You can hide it.
I have potentially.
You gotta get closer. That's okay. You don't have the jumbotron. Just gotta get a little closer. All right, here we go. Ta-da.
Using other microphones if that doesn't work. All right, we're just gonna roll
zoom
with
in.
it like this. Yeah, let's see.
At 100% or 200? Oh, there we go.
So, yeah, that's essentially to boil this down. What we have to focus on for potential cost adding regulations, I think typically winds up coming in the form of the dimensional restrictions for each zone. And that would be in the 200 sections. The 100 section does not have very much in it that is actually actionable. A lot of that is just a.
If you go to this little arrow, you can get rid of it. Push it up.
This arrow here.
Mhm. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. Excellent. Always something new to learn with Excel. And so, yeah, I should say I am definitely going to reformat this into a more user-friendly document with hopefully with folks' input as well. And this can be a living document that we keep working on. So yeah, the 100 section of our land use regulations doesn't have very much in it that is actually adding any cost. And a lot of it is also just explaining how this piece of regulation fits into the state framework as well as the federal framework. So we are not really at liberty to take much action on that, but it is worth pointing to the size restrictions on ADUs. That's one thing that lives in the 100 section that we might want to take a look at. We also have in section 120 a stipulation for in keeping with state regulation that requires lots that are non-conforming but pre-existing to be developable if they are on sewer and water. I have put in here that we still do require 1/8 of an acre and 40 feet in frontage in both directions for a lot to be developed. And so that may well prevent us from complying with that piece of state regulation. And so there are potentially types of very small, narrow infill housing that we might be foregoing when we do that. And so other things like the requirement that we have on applicants to stabilize and return the site to previous conditions if they don't follow through with their land development. These things are the kind of regulations that I expect we're not going to find onerous. We probably find that that fits in with our planning values and that we don't want to see a bunch of, I guess, holes in the ground that just get abandoned for the sake of saving minor cost. So primarily the places that cost is added in the 200 section, which would be our zoning districts themselves. They're very similar between all of the districts. There are minor differences in them, but primarily what I have pointed out adds potential costs to housing development and restrictions that can make housing more difficult to build out are the general dimensional restrictions, be that on the land for subdivision or for the structure itself, how much of the lot it can cover, how much of the lot is required to be provided as lawn, and how much of the lot can be impervious. That one may well be more amenable to our planning values potentially. Height restrictions that are not
the cursor over the one you're speaking about.
Sure. Height restrictions that are not born out of actual infrastructural requirements like fire suppression. Those sort of restrictions on how much housing can be built, I think we ought to take a substantial consideration because we are, frequently expressing a urgent need to create housing. And so I think a lot of those areas, while we've removed the density requirements in all of our developed zones and left them in place on the rural districts, which I think likely does also conform to our planning values. It is still the case that there are some checks on density in effect in the way that we've created these dimensional standards. But building design requirements are another particular cost adding feature. And again, this is kind of the situation where I think most productive conversation of our planning values would probably come into effect because I think while there are likely some valid, very I guess, libertarian-minded arguments for not having any of those kind of design restrictions at all. I think there are also a lot of folks who think that regulating aesthetic quality of the built environment for the community's overall appearance and larger scale economic development. I think those two are in tension, and it would be interesting to see how we might try to resolve that in the best practice that we can. The large lot size requirements in the rural districts are another potential issue that we could take a look at, whether that's effectively conserving land, which was the planning value that drove that particular restriction, or whether that is creating what does slug stand for? The rural sprawl. Said sprawl. Anyways, there's a rural sprawl type that I think is in some of the Vermont planning documents that I'll try to pull those up and send them out to folks. Typically, when we're conceiving of sprawl, we're thinking of commercial strips, maybe cul-de-sac neighborhoods and new construction McMansions, so to speak. But we're not often being critical of the low density rural sprawl that Vermont is particularly guilty of. And so we might want to take a look at if our regulations are creating a incentive for that sort of land development instead of a more efficient use of land in that area. So I should back up and say one way of conceiving of these as adding cost is the immediate upfront cost to the development itself. And I suppose another way that we could conceive of adding costs to development is the long-term cost of maintaining infrastructure and land use to the community. And those things being potentially in tension that we might want to think about critically and discuss amongst ourselves as well. One of the, I think, biggest low-hanging fruit that I think has potential to potentially be controversial, but is, I think, the most significant added cost that is not justifiable is our parking minimum and requiring the construction of new off-street parking for virtually all development in town. I think, you know, maybe there needs to be a memo articulating that more specifically, and to not spend a lot of time on that now. But I think if we have a particular piece of our regulations that definitely needs to be looked at critically, and I would argue removed completely. But of course, you know, entertaining other comments on that particular view. I think that is one of the easiest ways that we could substantially reduce costs of development, and I think also be boosting equity and environmental sustainability at the same time. So as well, in our special use standards, we have additional requirements for design that we've applied to multifamily residential types. And I think that is another one of the subtle areas where we are likely seeing added costs, especially to that kind of dense housing. And so it is, I can understand what the planning values were that drove our requirements to have balcony and patio space, which is the sort of private open space as well as the public open space, green space for residents. Those are things that we're requiring of multifamily, I think above 4 units, but we are not requiring that of lower density housing. So that may well be in conflict with our ability to actually see the market provide as much multifamily housing as we'd like to. And so that might also be worth taking into consideration. I think our landscaping standards and our stormwater standards are two other places that likely add considerable cost. However, I think I would expect that we'd likely find that our stormwater regulations could be tweaked to be simpler and more less regulatory barrier to the applicant, but still likely satisfy our planning values to protect the environment as well as not prohibit us from securing FEMA funding. But I think our landscaping requirements are probably worth looking at critically and thinking about whether that is actually worth the cost that it's likely adding to development. Especially, I pointed out here in 315I, we have an additional requirement that we add to landscaping parking lots in order to shade them from the sun. So that's one of the things that I'm calling second order costs, because it's something that we're requiring you do for something that we're already requiring you to have in the first place. So in this case, landscaping a parking lot that you're required to provide. In addition to that, I neglected to mention that we are also requiring electric vehicle chargers and screening in many cases for larger parking lots. And those are also, that would be a cost added to a cost. And so another example of those is the minimum front yard setback being required in most of our zones so that you can't have zero lot line development, but at the same time, requirements to landscape that particular area as well. And final place that we might want to look into some tweaks is first in the subdivisions and planned unit development standards. There are a lot of the same kind of potential issues as in our base zoning, which is essentially dimensional restrictions on the land and the structures that you can build, as well as design requirements on the buildings. Virtually all of the planned unit developments are also similarly requiring the provision of parking and site landscaping. So those are worth considering as well. Some of the review processes are required by state statute to happen a certain way. So I don't believe that what I'm going to say next is actually applicable to subdivision review. But one place that the state agency of commerce and community development, their zoning for great neighborhoods toolbox for municipalities really has a lot to say about reducing the amount of conditional review and trying to make as much administrative review as possible to reduce administrative delay and potential for the denial of good development, especially housing. I don't think that we're seeing bad faith denials of any conditional use on our development review board here, frankly, but I also don't think I've seen any of our housing, of our multifamily housing be denied. So I don't think that that's particularly a problem for us, but the amount of conditional review that's required of us likely is. So if we made a site plan review an administrative process, or at the very least, if we did not subject multifamily developments to site plan review in a public hearing when we exempt 1 and 2 family housing, that would be a potentially substantial cost savings. And that is according to the state, good practice that they'd like to see. One thing that we probably don't have any time for that I've put in here out of interest is I think the town has other policies from other departments that might have that might be a nice potential place to start a conversation about how we can coordinate policy across departments to reduce potential added cost to housing. So essentially, in reading our water and sewer ordinance, there seem to be potential ways that we are charging extra costs to more dense development. And I know we've got some fans of strong towns, like Sarah has mentioned that in the past. I think they have very frequently written about how water and sewer allocation is a major issue in cost of development. So that might be worth us paying some attention to in the future. But finally, I think our parking ordinance that requires for the on-street parking ban for half of the calendar year, that's frequently the first thing that is referenced when there's a discussion of removing the parking minimum. So that would seem to be maybe not directly adding a cost itself, but it's another substantial obstacle to potentially addressing some of the regulations that we have that do add costs. So I'd love to take comment if anybody's got any feelings either way.
Yeah, because I know you mentioned at the park, there's signage fall into that preview as well. So with
For housing?
yeah.
Yeah, so I think you'd find signage is one thing that isn't in here, and neither did I include the outdoor storage or the lighting standards. I think you could argue that lighting adds a negligible cost, but I didn't think that was worth including. And yeah, signage for housing is not, I don't think, particularly relevant in terms of cost, but I think we could potentially look into these sort of exercises for other types of development, but I don't think we're in a situation where it's nearly as necessary in comparison to housing.
Sarah.
Try now, Sarah.
Okay, there we go. Thank you.
Great.
That's okay. This is incredibly nerdy and I love it. I love that you spent, I'm assuming, a lot of time putting this together. Did you send this in an email, or is that something that you will be sharing with us?
Yeah, so I can definitely share this directly with folks following the meeting. Thinking it's kind of unwieldy the way that it is now. So my hope was that, in taking comments and gauging how we're feeling about this as a conversation starter, that we could have a more, conversational memo.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah, I think it would be great to have a copy, just so it's obviously hard to look through all the work you put in when scrolling through on screen. I'm wondering if because you sort of mentioned it just when talking through it, but it wasn't really, at least I didn't see anything that delineated, you had mentioned these specific sections would probably be the most cost benefit, of if we remove parking, that would probably be the biggest bang for our buck. And I'm wondering if maybe, we can, or if you could I don't know, color code, the rows or something, saying these 5 would be the most, it'd be the most useful to look into these, because this would have the biggest impact, and maybe a medium and a low, and then ones that are maybe unreachable, or you were mentioning there's state regulations that we have to follow anyways, so it's maybe not even worth looking into. Just some sort of key that could delineate between those would be great.
Yeah, I feel I had both of those elements in there, and then I took them out at the last second because I thought would be distracting. I will definitely take that into consideration.
Yeah, that would be helpful. And then send it along so we can, a little light nighttime reading.
With the coffee.
Yeah, I just want to just give Steve a little bit of praise. I was on vacation last week and he worked really hard on both the maps for the cannabis presentation and this. So thanks, Steve.
Yeah, everybody get into QGIS. It's free. You don't have to pay Esri. They don't want you to know.
Yeah, okay, Prudence. Oh, it's on mute.
Oh, I thought I turned it so that you could all unmute yourself. Sorry. Let me try again.
I think you did. Great. So yeah, this was interesting, and I thought the visuals for the hearing were really good as well. Just help me understand. Will we be looking at some of these issues that you've identified, Steve, in the bylaw modernization process?
That was my hope. I was thinking that this is one way for us to start thinking about, as we are taking housing seriously, especially, that we could strategize which of our existing regulations are potentially standing in the way of our ability to see housing get built out. And, since housing is also the focus of our bylaw modernization, I was hoping that, we could get input from you all and really develop a list of ones that we'd like to see maybe changed to fit our goals without adding cost in a way that is not acceptable to us, and some that we might just want to see removed, and then have that to give to Brandy to start.
Great, thanks.
Dan.
Okay, takes an extra second. Thank you. Yeah, I noticed, I'm sure this is in more places than this, just the couple I noticed, but for example, waterfront district and rural district have a limit of 3+ units. And I'm just curious why that is the number when commercial properties are 5+ units. Like, we have this local decision that 3 units is the magic number. I'm just curious if someone could give me some history on that.
Yeah, I think it's because there's a lot of protections in state statute for 1 and 2 family homes.
Mm-hmm.
You treat a 2-family like a 1-family, so they're permitted uses under statute. So that's really where the 3 comes from. And I know it's not consistent with what the town considers commercial. So, perhaps that's a good place to go.
Yeah, I mean, especially in the rural district and the waterfront, I can only speculate what, effect that could have if you change that number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'd like to add on to a part of what Sarah and Prudence said, and just about what we're going to do with this. Steve, do you envision that you said that, will this document and us talking through it and working through it will help us give focus to, to place sense for the bylaw modernization grant? Do you envision that all of the drafting of the regs will be done by them, or there's some that staff will do and some that they'll do, or is this solely us helping us give input to place sense?
So I think that some of this will be staff.
Okay.
I don't think that this entire list will fall under the purview of the bylaw modernization grant, which is really focused on the housing.
Right.
I think, and particularly housing in the water and sewer service area. So I think some of what's going on in the more rural parts of town, maybe even, I'm sure that Place Sense will get into the parking, but in terms of, kind of wholesale changes, that's probably going to come from staff. So I think in the end, we're going to get some, we're going to get language from Place Sense that we may also have some suggestions for language in those other areas, and it'll all be integrated together.
The best way that I see us giving input on this is by doing a little bit of homework. But it's after seeing Steve's on whichever way you're going to choose to reformat it and highlight your top picks, low hanging fruit, most feasible, most effective, whatever way you choose to go forward. I mean, we're not going to micromanage. I don't think, we think you guys are capable, intelligent people, as staff. So, please weigh in, weigh in and choose what you think is best. But then maybe if then that copy gets to all of us, then it will have some way that then we can say, well, I agree. You did a perfect job. I have nothing to add. Or no, I think this is really important. Or you just totally missed this in this document. And I scanned through all 200 pages of land use regs and I found some other things like the lighting or whatever you said, Gary. And then we could finalize that next meeting. Okay.
That sounds good.
Yeah, I would love to see input from folks on maybe some sort of number scale of like, I think this is worth having, or I think this sounds like it's something that we should consider changing or removing.
Yeah.
How well it fits with your planning values, maybe from a 1 being very little to not at all, to a 5 or 10 or whatever we want.
Yeah. Well, barring hearing any other strategy, I feel like whatever way is most interpretable for you, set it up that way. And I know for one, I'll let my, I'll do the homework in between this meeting and next meeting, and hopefully everyone can too, or at least come, review it and come to next meeting with comments, and somehow that can be worked in.
So my expectation is that I will boil them down from, I don't think it's a relevant piece to have it be organized by here's every section in order. I'll do it in terms of here are like 5 different themes in ways that we are potentially adding cost. And then just a appendix with all of the citations of here's where you got to find that. That probably would fit on 1 to 2 pages instead of what you were just having to look at. So I think that would be kinder to folks if I reformat that. So how's about I hold myself to 1 to 2 business days and then send it out to
Fair enough.
I don't think there's a rush, but
How about early
it's no
next week?
urgency.
yeah, next week.
Now you're gonna use Microsoft, right? Just
Are you an open office guy?
Office Outlook. Well, I can't get that. That's to get certain PDFs. I can't, as you know.
Oh, we'll send it in Word or
Okay.
Excel. Yeah, we
You
can
can't
do
open PDFs?
Well, no,
I thought that was the easy thing.
Oh, mine's, I don't know.
Oh, okay. Well.
I mean, in order to add additions, like say for instance, you've
Oh.
already done it, and then on the side, people could do like when you do the what was that, the Survey Monkey the last time, people had those little boxes can make additions. Could you add this? I mean, that's one way. I could do a monkey.
I'm not sure I'm following.
A
that.
survey.
Well,
Put
like
it
a
all-
Survey Monkey, like when you sent out a while back something, and then Tom and I added some additions to the comments. There's a comment box at the bottom. You can add certain things.
I think the question is about sort of interactive editing.
Right, and then you
Got
can
it.
go back and
Yeah.
look. And it wouldn't have to be a survey. It's just,
Yeah,
Having a Google shareable sheets would be great, but I know we've got some misgivings about whether that's.
Open meeting.
kosher under open meeting
right,
law.
good security reasons
Yeah.
and so forth.
well, open meeting law,
Yeah, OML.
everybody.
Well, you could do it just for an accommodation reason.
I could just hear.
Sorry, maybe I
Yeah, folks can
misunderstood.
send me an edit and I'll incorporate them all. I've had
Yeah,
to do
okay.
that with the
Because it's
Conservation
Marquis
Commission.
number 1A, 1B.
Okay, let's hear from Dan, and then I think we're going to wrap up.
Yeah, it's just another numbers question for Steve. You mentioned the 1/8 of an acre and 40 feet of frontage minimum lot size. Is there any guidance in the literature on, in a practical sense, where the floor is on that, as far as, and maybe if you have any thoughts on it right now, I'm just curious really, because it's obviously it's a pretty big lot,
Sure. Yeah, I think that is worth potentially trying to do a dive and see if anyone's written about that. That's not something I've necessarily looked into specifically, but that would be worth maybe like the Urban Land Institute or other
Yeah.
institutions like that might have some research studies. Because I do understand that if we don't have dimensional requirements, then we wouldn't have any way to say this subdivision isn't acceptable because you're creating a 1 foot by 1 foot lot, and that will just
Oh, sure.
be undeveloped.
Yeah, I'm not saying to have no standard. I'm just wondering, where.
Yes, right. So what the minimum standard we could have that is most equitable to actually allowing for, skinny houses.
Yeah.
That would be worth looking into. I know we've got at least one interesting skinny tall house in one of our residential neighborhoods. Might be worth looking at that, asking, potentially trying to contact the owners, ask them.
Pearl Street.
Yeah, right. It reminds me of like Austin, Texas, or any of these cities where we're seeing a lot of skinny sort of single family infill.
Not pods, right?
It's like a tower almost.
Yeah, more or less. So
Box.
if that's a perfectly good type of housing development that we're not facilitating, then
Mm-hmm.
I could see about doing that.
Okay. Little over time, but if you got something.
Last quick, I'd like to also get to that with the pod things that's going on now, and probably the next agenda, just to see what's going on up in these other places that are building, like in Burlington, see where are we with that? What can we do? Because it seems like these things are popping up, cropping up, working, and then look at, you were saying before about, land waste and all that. How are they incorporating? And then I could probably find out and see who's doing it up there, maybe invite them to give us.
I wouldn't invite anybody for June because I think our consultant's going to be here. So
Right.
Okay. So that'd be like down the
we're
road.
gonna watch the agenda. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Certainly, if you wanted to inquire with, is it Burlington?
Yeah.
If you wanted to reach out to their
Project person.
relevant contacts and ask them if they have any reading materials that, you could share out to us, and if there's interest in talking about that. I know there's been a lot of controversy too in some of those other Chittenden County towns about different development and regulatory change. So looking at what is working and what isn't working in other towns and seeing what we can learn from that for our regulations could be good too.
For public feedback and how they.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dan.
Just a quick thing, just to put that in a general category, it would be useful to talk about temporary housing versus permanent housing as well. And I don't think that's it does come in terms of, tent city type discussions and pods and tiny houses and that kind of thing. But, I think that's a good way to, we could definitely have that conversation of, to address that question of alternative housing or
That could
temporary
just
housing.
be a section in the land use regs, potentially. Temporary housing, transient housing.
I have to think about that.
Yeah, I think we all do, but.
Just want to remind you, we have public on here, so we should open it.
Oh, we do. Oh, great. Yeah. So we finished the meeting with a public comment period. If there's any public, and I see David Miner and Brian Bannon, if we count him as the public. David, if you'd like to say anything or provide any comment, please do.
I'm giving him an opportunity to.
Okay.
unmute, or if he would
Did he
like.
just
Can you hear
sign on? Yes.
Oh, okay. No, I'm all set. I was late to the party. I apologize, but I found the conversation very interesting.
Were you here to see the whole meeting, the cannabis thing in the beginning, or just?
No, actually, I was on another board meeting, so I had to get through that first, and then I was probably much more interested in the land use conversation, which I found fascinating. So
Okay. Yeah. Well, we're going to be talking about this stuff a lot this year, so please
Good.
come back. Okay. There being no other business, I adjourn this meeting.
A second. Gavel's over there.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. To be continued.